Afghanistan in 2002, and you were called into a very remote section, something coming out of the cave, and it's moving with a speed and agility that catches you off.
In the spring of 2002, somewhere in the unforgiving mountain ranges outside Kandahar, Afghanistan, a story began circulating through military channels that was unlike anything soldiers were trained to process. It did not involve a Taliban ambush. It did not involve an IED or a failed extraction. According to those who claimed to have witnessed it, it involved something that had no place in any military field manual, any intelligence briefing, or any known catalog of threats. It involved a creature. And according to the accounts that have persisted for more than 2 decades since, what was allegedly found inside a cave in those mountains was not just terrifying in the moment. It was terrifying enough that the people in charge apparently decided the rest of the world should never know about it at all. The story, as it has been told across veteran forums, independent research communities, and alternative media platforms, begins with a routine patrol disappearing without explanation. A U.S. Army infantry squad deployed during Operation Enduring Freedom was assigned to monitor a known insurgent supply corridor through the mountains. By every account, the mission began without incident. Radio check-ins came in on schedule. Movement was steady and controlled. Nothing in the early days of the patrol suggested that anything unusual was developing. Then the communication stopped entirely. Not gradually, not with a distress call, not with the sound of gunfire picked up by nearby units. Just silence, sudden and complete, where disciplined soldiers had been reporting in moments before. What made the silence alarming was not just its abruptness, but what it implied. These were not inexperienced men operating in unfamiliar conditions for the first time. They were trained for exactly this terrain, this environment, this kind of mission. They knew how to communicate under fire, under pressure, and under every kind of threat the Afghan mountains were known to produce. The fact that no distress signal came, no emergency frequency activation, no burst transmission, nothing, was itself deeply abnormal. A reconnaissance was dispatched over their last known coordinates. It returned with nothing. No signs of combat. No smoke. No movement. No bodies. The squad had simply ceased to exist in any detectable sense. Command made the decision to deploy a Tier 1 Special Operations Recovery Unit to investigate. These were among the most experienced soldiers in the American military, operators trained to walk into the worst situations on Earth and function with clarity. What they found at the last known position of the missing patrol was not a firefight scene. It was something harder to categorize. Across the rocky terrain were fragments of destroyed equipment, tactical vests that appeared to have been torn rather than shot through, weapons bent and broken in ways that gunfire or explosion would not typically produce, communications gear crushed as though under enormous physical pressure. And across the ground, according to the accounts, were deep drag trails cutting through the dirt and gravel, long parallel grooves suggesting that heavy objects, or bodies, had been pulled across the earth with significant force. There was no blood. There were no shell casings. There was no pattern that matched any known enemy tactic or predator behavior. There was only the wreckage, the silence, and the drag marks leading toward the mountain. Following those marks, the recovery team located a cave entrance partially concealed by the natural rock formation of the hillside. Entering a cave in Taliban territory carried its own well-understood risks. The operators advanced carefully, weapons ready, moving through the narrowing passage with the discipline their training demanded. What the cave revealed, according to those who claimed to have been present, was not an insurgent position. It was something far older and far stranger. Scattered across the cave floor was the military debris of the missing patrol, torn uniforms, broken equipment, the remnants of gear that men had been carrying when they vanished. Mixed among those remnants, according to the accounts, were human skeletal remains. Not intact bodies. not soldiers killed by gunfire or blast injury. Bones, scattered and fractured in ways that did not correspond to any weapon in the known arsenal of the conflict. Bones cracked and broken with a force that investigators present allegedly could not attribute to any identified cause. And then, according to the story as it has been told, something emerged from deeper within the cave. The accounts describe a figure of extraordinary size, estimates placing its height between 13 and 15 feet, moving upright with a speed and silence that witnesses found profoundly disorienting. The descriptions that have circulated consistently across different tellings include long reddish hair, elongated limbs, and the specific anatomical detail of 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. This last detail has attracted particular attention from researchers who study ancient texts, because polydactyly, the condition of having extra digits, appears in several ancient Near Eastern and biblical accounts of giant beings. The Book of Samuel in the Old Testament references a warrior from Gath who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. The Book of Enoch, a Jewish apocryphal text, describes the Nephilim, giant offspring of divine beings and human women, as possessing extraordinary physical characteristics and violent natures. Whether these textual parallels are evidence of anything real or simply the architecture through which human beings have always processed encounters with the inexplicably large and threatening is a question that researchers have not resolved. The firefight that allegedly followed was, by all accounts that have surfaced, extremely brief and extremely violent. Soldiers opened fire with M4 carbines and sidearms. The creature, according to witnesses, sustained impacts that would have immediately incapacitated any human opponent and continued to advance. Only when a designated marksman engaged with a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle, one of the most powerful infantry weapons in the American arsenal, did the creature fall. The impact of its collapse reportedly shook debris from the cave's ceiling. One soldier, referred to in the accounts only as Dan, was fatally wounded during the engagement. No military casualty record matching that name, that location, and that time period has ever been located in any publicly accessible database. The institutional response to the story, once fragments of it began circulating, has been categorical denial. The Department of Defense has issued statements characterizing the entire account as fiction. No after-action reports have been released. No casualty records match the described engagement. No official acknowledgement of any unusual recovery operation near Kandahar during that period has ever been made public. Freedom of Information Act requests filed by independent researchers have returned either empty responses or documents so heavily redacted as to be unreadable. One detail that has attracted attention among investigators is an alleged 24-hour gap in flight logs at Bagram Air Base during the period when the extraction would have occurred. Whether the gap reflects deliberate removal of records, a clerical anomaly, a system failure, or simply the normal behavior of classified operational documentation is impossible to determine from available evidence. To understand why this story resonates so powerfully, it helps to understand the landscape in which it emerged, both literally and culturally. The mountains of southern Afghanistan have carried stories of giant beings for centuries. Afghan and Persian folklore describes entities known as the Deo, enormous and violent creatures said to inhabit remote highland regions, sometimes depicted with red hair and terrible strength. These traditions existed long before American soldiers arrived in the country, and researchers who study cross-cultural mythology have noted that similar giant figures appear independently across Central Asian, Middle Eastern, and South Asian traditions. When exhausted, isolated soldiers operating in high-stress conditions in a landscape saturated with these ancient associations encounter something they cannot immediately explain. The folklore of the region provides a ready framework for interpretation. Whether that framework reflects genuine ancient encounters with something real, or simply the universal human tendency to populate frightening unknown spaces with frightening unknown creatures, remains genuinely open. The psychological dimension of the story cannot be dismissed either. An honest examination of the Kandahar Giant legend requires engaging with it seriously. Combat stress produces measurable, documented effects on perception and memory. Sleep deprivation, which is endemic in extended patrol operations, degrades the brain's ability to accurately assess size, distance, and threat. Group dynamics in high-stress situations can produce shared misinterpretations, where multiple individuals reinforce each other's perceptions of something ambiguous in ways that later crystallize into detailed and consistent-seeming memories. Researchers who study post-traumatic stress and combat psychology have documented cases where soldiers experienced encounters with perceived threats that later investigation could not verify. None of this proves that the Kandahar Giant story is a product of psychological distortion, but it establishes that such an explanation is scientifically coherent and should be part of any honest assessment. What keeps the story alive despite official denial, psychological alternative explanations, and the complete absence of verifiable physical evidence is a combination of factors that serious researchers have identified as significant. The consistency of key details across accounts that emerged independently and from different sources is notable. The specific claim of six-fingered hands appears across multiple tellings from people who, as far as investigators can determine, had no contact with each other before their accounts surfaced. The alleged career consequences for those who spoke out create a documented chilling effect on further disclosure. And the broader context of the early years of the Afghanistan War, a period of significant classified activity, unconventional operations, and information control, makes it genuinely difficult to distinguish between the silence of an institution with nothing to hide and the silence of one that has made a deliberate decision to conceal. Researcher L.A. Marzulli has been among the most prominent figures to pursue the story publicly, publishing interviews with anonymous sources claiming direct involvement in the recovery operation and arguing that the physical description of the creature aligns with what ancient texts described as the Nephilim, a race of giant beings whose remains, Marzulli and others in his research community argue, have been systematically suppressed by governments and institutions unwilling to confront the implications for human history and religious understanding. This interpretation has significant following in certain research communities. It has no mainstream scientific support. But the absence of mainstream scientific engagement with a claim is not, by itself, evidence that the claim is false. It is evidence that the claim has not met the evidentiary threshold that mainstream science requires, which is a different thing. What was found in that cave, if anything was found at all, remains genuinely unknown. The official answer is that nothing extraordinary happened, that no patrol vanished under the described circumstances, and that the entire story is a product of internet folklore amplified through communities predisposed to believe it. The unofficial answer, assembled from anonymous testimonies, alleged document gaps, and decades of persistent cross-corroborating accounts, is that something happened in the mountains outside Kandahar that those who witnessed it could not explain, and that those in authority decided the public would not be told about. Both positions have their logic. Neither has been proven. The cave, wherever it is, has not offered up its answer. And until it does, the story will keep being told, because stories about what hides in the darkness of places we cannot reach have always been told, in every culture, in every age, for reasons that may say more about us than about whatever is out there waiting to be found.